have any questions, you're welcome to ask.
Yeah, thank you. Well, my question is, how do you think, what is the effect of current financial crisis of Europe on Kazakhstan, and what is going to be the future of euro currency long term?
I think I've tried to answer the first question during my presentation. I explained that now we are not directly affected, because the transmission mechanism for Kazakhstan would be theoretical, and God forbid, would be similar to what has happened in October 2008. So if there is a substantial recession in Europe, accumulated demand for commodities would go down, and then commodity prices would go down. But again, even in that case, we have, as I said, a very substantial amount of money in the national fund, which would allow us to maintain reasonably strong growth for a couple of years. As for the euro, it's quite clear that it's very much a political project. So I don't think that major European countries would abandon euro. Also, there are quite a few legal issues which could be addressed, so it's not that easy to let Greece or any other country out of euro. Technically, whichever country which leaves the euro should also leave European Union. So I think that there are quite a few legal and technical complications, and definitely, Greece debts should be restructured, but they should be restructured in an orderly way. Basically, that solution could be finalized within several hours, but it's not an issue of finding a technical solution, because there are several. What was done for sovereign debt of Latin American countries in early 90s, so-called Brady bonds. In late 90s, Eurobonds of several sovereign states like Ecuador, Pakistan and Ukraine were restructured. And what we have done on the restructuring of our three banks, where the haircut was 60 to 70%, and the overall amount of write-offs was $10.5 billion, or 10% of GDP of Kazakhstan in 2007. So there are several options how it could be done, and on the technical side it could be done very quickly, but there is simply lack of political will, because a lot of European politicians, they're worried more about the forthcoming national elections and less about the global economy, which is much more active. So in that sense, if they find this political will, they could do a technical solution reasonably quickly, and euro would not be affected. And basically, we all need euro as an alternative to US dollar, and I personally believe that multipolar world requires several reserve currencies, and over-relying on US dollar, which we have seen a few decades before, is counterproductive.
What about national IPO that is coming up in 2012?
This is something which is being developed by Ministry of Economy and Ministry of Finance. We clearly support this as a principle, because we believe that more wide distribution of wealth and shares among the population of our country is important. Developing equity culture is also very important, because it's a different class of instruments compared with fixed income. And people should realize that if they build a diversified portfolio, they should have both fixed income and equity in that portfolio. But this is a long way to go, in the sense that we had some experience with mutual funds in 06 and 07, and within 12 months people have invested $2 billion in mutual funds, when the returns were 36–39% a year. But then when the market started falling in 2008, people started abandoning mutual funds very quickly and going back to bank deposits and fixed income instruments. So I think that would be the next attempt in general to develop our stock market on one side and develop equity culture on the other side. So in general, we as a central bank firmly supportive of this.
But how beneficial it will be for shareholders this time?
Depends on an issue, depends on the shareholder, because that's precisely what is called equity culture. people should realize that over the long term, equity provides average high returns. But over the short term, you can buy shares for 1 million tenge and they would be worth 700,000 in 1 year. If you wait, in another 2 years, they could go to 1.5 million tenge. So for the 3 years, you win. And that's much better. But over short term, it's much more fluctuating. There is more volatility on the equity. And also, there is no principle of nominalism. If you put your deposit with the bank, I mean, you are guaranteed that, the same, for instance, 1 million tenge. It would be repaid to you plus interest. In case of equity, 1 year later it could be 700,000, it could be 1.3 million, depends on the market development. So people should understand that equity is more medium to long term investment, and they should invest into equity only if they already have some amount of money on deposits in the banks and invested in fixed income. That would be beneficial for their diversified portfolio. If somebody, like it happened in many countries, borrows money from a bank in order to buy shares, believing that the only way is up, we will have the same situation as we had on the real estate market in the city of Almaty after the crisis. So a lot of realtors were telling about golden quadrangle and that the prices of Almaty would never go down. They went down like a rock and still are twice lower than pre-crisis. And same could happen to shares, same could happen to oil prices, same could happen to gold prices. We as economists should all realize that market economy is cyclical and prices of assets go up sometimes and sometimes go down. And that's what's important about understanding equity culture. Yes, please.
Objectivity, independence. As foreign investors look at Kazakhstan, they want very much for the central bank to be truly objective and independent of the federal government.
It's not federal, excuse me. Federal government you have in the United States. Here we have a unitary state.
Yes.
So there is no federalism in Kazakhstan.
No government.
Okay.
So I would like your input on that, and my colleague here and I both share a second question, which is there seems to be a substantial amount of incredulity, that is to say, non-believing of inflation numbers. Mm-hmm. What do you think the source of that distrust is?
Well, first question is easy. To explain. It was difficult to attain independence. And we did it the hard way. Again, most of the students here are definitely too young to remember. And most of the professors were not around at that time. But in 1994, there was a lot of inter-enterprise arrears. And there was a great, in brackets, idea promoted by the then Prime Minister that if we give a lot of money to the companies and they repay their debts, then they will be able to repay these loans, inter-enterprise arrears would be cleared, and everything would be hunky-dory. And they were saying that there would be no effect for the inflation and no effect for the exchange rate. And we as a central bank, and then I was at Georgetown University, so and I'm telling you the story, I wasn't part of it. And if I were, I would have resigned anyway. So the central bank was forced, and there was a presidential decree which was not signed or initialed by the governor of the central bank of the day, Mr. Simbayev. And so in February 1994, they started this clearing exercise. And actually, if you look at the exchange rate development, we had a situation where tenge was introduced at 4.75 towards US dollar. Then it devalued to 11 by January, in 3 months. And then it stabilized. But then after the clearing exercise happened, the exchange rate went from 11 to 40 tenge per dollar in 3 months. And the inflation rate went on a monthly basis. I mean, it increased threefold. And actually, when I came back from Georgetown University and was given the job of someone, a deputy governor responsible for monetary policy, the monthly inflation rate was 46.5%. But people understood. And the most important thing was that the president understood that you cannot play with independence of the central bank. Even if everyone around you says that, okay, printing a lot of money is a good thing, it's not necessarily the case. And then we took the Bundesbank Gesetz or law of 1957 as a model, and we developed a brand new law on the central bank, which implemented most of the features of the Bundesbank law, and it was adopted in March of 1995. And I think that's when we got our independence. And when the government and everybody else left for Astana, I think it was even solidified. So in that sense, there is no issue. I mean, central bank in Kazakhstan is independent, but it's not, I mean, natural. And it didn't happen overnight. And there were several costly mistakes done in 1990s. On the inflation side, for me it's difficult because we are not compiling inflation numbers. It's done by National Agency for Statistics. Point number one. Point number two, as you all know, IMF, or International Monetary Fund, is a large organization, and they have a statistical department within it. And they send missions every 2 years in order to check how inflation data is collected and processed in countries. And for the last 12 years, there were no substantial complaints about the methodology in Kazakhstan. And actually Russia and Ukraine are mostly also getting better marks. Not all CIS countries are getting the same. So my point is that it's very difficult for us to criticize this data because we are users like anyone else. And coming up with alternative methodology, and I mean employing hundreds of people collecting this data with markets and in the shops would be expensive and counterproductive. So I have no formal grounds to doubt the methodology and the data, but the problem is people, we all live in the same world, but okay, we all live in the same city, but take three people hanging around the same part of power. One is, I mean, wealthy financier, another one is a student, and the third one is a pensioner. They go to different shops, they go to different eateries, be it restaurants or cafes. I mean, they travel by different modes of transport, right? So they see the world differently. Those people who have cars and are driving them, for them what's important is what's the price of gasoline. I mean, my father, who's 81 years old, he says, I don't care about gasoline prices. What I care are the prices of food, the communal tariffs, and the prices for medicine. Because, I mean, he's got to buy things from the dark store. So he has his own CPI, which doesn't include 500 position, it includes only 50. And people looking at their own CPIs, they have this idea, okay, they're talking about 7 or 8%, but my basket has increased by 10 or 15%, and that means that their methodology is wrong. But it's not necessarily the case. How many people, I mean, I've asked my parents not to read any of the newspapers, and thanks God they're not on the internet after the devaluation, because there were so many bad things written about me personally, as if that was my dream, leave a much better paid job in the private sector and go to the central bank and do the devaluation to get it to them. Not really. And so my point is that we've done a lot of studies, and we're also doing polling of, like many other central banks do. So 60 to 65% of all companies in Kazakhstan, 2/3, are not affected by exchange rate development. And 65% of our population doesn't care much. Why? Because they get their wages and salaries in tenge, and they buy locally produced food, which is 65% of the overall food consumed in this country, and locally produced goods, which are 67% of consumption. So, and people living in Almaty and Astana, they live in completely different world compared with the rural areas of, say, Jambil province or Atral. And I know that because I've crisscrossed the country on several occasions. And they would say, okay, my world was affected because of the dollar exchange rate. But excuse me, 2/3 of the country were not whatsoever. So people should not extrapolate their own world or their own basket of CPI to the whole country. And when you do the aggregation for 16.5 million people, you sometimes get results which are unacceptable for you personally. So that's my answer.
Mr. Marchenko, since you are on this topic, by the way, Donald's CPI index consists of going to the pub, going to the bar, and the price of beer.
Switch to local beer and you'll be happy.
Since you're talking about exchange rate, are you pegging to dollar? Is tenge being pegged to dollar? Which
Not really.
is obvious. And what we're looking at in the future, coming future?
Well, pegging would be, first of all, there are different currency mechanisms. Peg is more or less fixing a rate. There is also a crawling peg. What we're using is called managed float. And this is clearly specified again in IMF documents. We are not fighting the trends. So in that sense, whereas there are more dollars flowing into the market, you have appreciation of tenge. When there is more demand for dollars, there is depreciation of tenge. What we are doing, we are preventing short-term fluctuations. And for instance, I've already explained it on several occasions. In the spring this year, we had overall about $3.5 billion of speculative investment. Foreign investors were betting that tenge would appreciate because of the increasing oil prices. And as you know, there is a game of self-fulfilling prophecies. So if they invest money in tenge instruments, tenge appreciates, then they get revenues. They invest more money, tenge appreciates even further. We have seen this movie in 05, 06. So we prevented tenge from appreciating too far. We allowed it to appreciate to about 145.5, but we more or less bought all these inflows. So these speculative investors were getting only, 3 to 4%. And then when all these problems started this year in the summer in Europe and United States, in July, August, and September, all this money ran away, as they always do. So these were short-term speculative inflows. But we didn't allow tenge to depreciate. And again, I'm not saying that this is the perfect or imperfect policy, because for instance in Russia they did it differently. First they allowed ruble to appreciate by 20%, and then depreciation in several months was 19%. Whereby in Kazakhstan fluctuations are plus minus 2%, in Russia they were plus minus 20%. We believe that this is counterproductive for the economy. But again, within the customs union, we should try to coordinate better. And our proposal was to use something similar to a snake mechanism, which was used in Europe in the 1970s. But again, it's very difficult because of the situation in Belarus, because it's very different from the situation in Kazakhstan or in Russia. And it's difficult to have coordinated monetary policy, including FX policy, in a situation like that. But I believe that the next year, after the repercussions of Belarusian devaluations would be more or less overcome, we could come up with sort of coordinated policies.
Hello. I would like to know the situation of Kazakhstani derivatives market, because as I know, the derivatives market of Kazakhstan is not developed to.
Yes, it's not developed.
Yes, and my question is how long it will take our Kazakhstani derivatives market to develop to a good level?
You see, it's very difficult because on one side you have a situation where this market has been underdeveloped for many years, On the other side, you have a situation where derivatives are a dirty word. I mean, I'm not joking. The sort of overuse of derivatives and overuse of complicated derivatives were one of the major causes of American financial crisis. And so in that sense, regulators have been trying to do things in this area. So first we should differentiate. If derivatives are developed or used for hedging purposes, they should definitely be accepted. And actually that's what we're trying to develop, because we have a situation on one side where banks have been borrowing internationally in dollars and lending domestically in tenge. On the other side, you have pension funds which have inflows in tenge because all the contributions are in tenge. But part of the investments should be abroad in dollars. So now we're working together with banks and pension funds in order more or less to marry them, because they have different positions and they would be natural partners in those hedges. For instance, in Chile, all the investments of pension funds abroad should be hedged. And the counterparty to those hedges, the most natural one would be local banks. And that's what we're working on. So derivatives for hedging purposes, yes. Derivatives for speculative purposes, no.